She was telling me that when I was talking to her, that her mic was working, her camera was working, and she could see us or hear us or something.
Could she hear us? Because she wasn't. But where did she go? You tell her to leave the studio and come back in?
Wait, hold on. Hey.
So I just called Debbie and she's coming back to the hotel room. She says she'll be here about 5 minutes.
Okay, all right.
I don't know how that will help, but at least I'll have somebody that knows what to help do.
Yes. I sympathize. Morgan knows a whole lot more about this than I do. So yeah, just let's see if Debbie can give us some insight.
So is this messing up the live stream then, I'm guessing?
Well, it's an unusual live stream at this point, but I think everybody knows that we're having technical difficulties. And well, we'll just start over with you and Morgan and me talking, but we won't end the stream because that would not be the thing to do. Okay. All right.
Well, just know that Debbie's on her way.
Okay.
Hopefully she can help us figure it out.
Morgan.
Maybe, given that we are already kind of, I would suggest maybe to Jessie to restart her laptop or her computer. That might work out any kind of bugs that are going on and might help out with the internet connection. It might, but it will delay her coming back on. But I think that's one thing that I know and that I've had trouble with, and it's restarting my computer, and it will sometimes flush out some of those issues.
Did you hear that, Jessie? Morgan. Okay. Can you restart your computer or your laptop?
And then just try and come back into Zoom and we'll try it out.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. No worries. All right. Bye-bye.
So what we can do, Ellen, so we're not just looking at each other, you can tell me a little bit about Jessie's book and the audience, and while we wait for her to come back into the studio.
I can read what I wrote about her for my introduction.
That's perfectly fine as well. I didn't know if you wanted to go into the book maybe, or, just, but yeah.
I was planning to read some things from the book. Although again, my notes disappeared where I had the pages, but it's fine. I can find it. Yeah, okay. So that's what we're gonna do right now.
Yeah, just I guess just we'll go into the introduction of who Jessie Harris is, and then we hopefully she'll be back in the studio at that time, and we'll see if the problems were fixed.
Okay, all right, that sounds good. So Jessie Harris is a remarkable woman who medically transitioned in the 1980s. Not because she believed she was a man trapped in a woman's body, but because being lesbian in a homophobic culture was dangerous. Okay, I'm going to turn this to was dangerous, from being sexually assaulted as a young girl because some boys wanted to satisfy their curiosity about her sex, to marrying a man and having a daughter who the state had the power to take away, to sending her daughter to live with her mother out of caution, to living off-grid in Alaska, to working as a long-haul trucker. Jessie has seen much of the world. After living as a man for 3 decades, she detransitioned for 2 reasons. One is that she began to understand that transitioning was one way to enter the closet, not escape from it. The other is that long years of taking testosterone caused her to need a hysterectomy and 5 heart attacks. She is opposed to medicalizing children. Okay.
Okay, how is it? Is it better?
Oh, wow. I can actually hear you and your lips are moving at the same time.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well done. So did
All
Debbie
right.
help with this, or did you figure it out yourself?
No, I restarted my computer, which would have been always the default that she taught me how to do. And she'll be here shortly, and we'll figure.
Well, now you
I
can tell her
guess
you
we
fixed the
figured
problem.
it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Which I'll get,
I
I'll
just
get a
read
pat on
about.
the back for that one.
Yeah.
Well, I would. Yeah. If I mean, you figured it out, so that's well done. So, as I've had my issues today
So
too.
you said you
Oh, no.
just what?
So what we were just talking about, Jessie, before you came on, was we were just introducing you, kind of going into some of the bullet
Yep,
points.
now on.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Hello,
We can hear you.
and we're down to it's that delay thing again. So I don't know what to do. I'm just patiently waiting for Debbie, my IT team, to get back.
I tell you what about if you just start telling people your story? And I mentioned that I mentioned some of the parts that you and I talked about, and that is in your book. And so, and I mentioned that you lived as a man for 3 decades. And I said that you either told me or is in your book that you detransitioned for 2 reasons. One being that you began to understand that transitioning was a way into the closet rather than out of it. And the other is that the decades of taking testosterone caused you to need a hysterectomy, and you had 5 heart attacks. And so for this reason, I'm sure other reasons, you're opposed to medicalizing children. So there's Debbie.
Well, first off, I never, ever, ever, not even once, wanted to transition in the first place. That's just the plain and simple fact. And
Okay.
so I'm going to stop for just a second and let Debbie come in here and take a look at and see what she can do about the delay piece. I don't know if she can or not. Yeah, so she says she cannot do anything about the delay. Can you hear me okay? Is that just the only thing that we're dealing with, or what?
Yeah. There's no delay on my end, and I assume not on the end of the listeners.
All right. Okay. So
I didn't hear it delay.
right, and I had restarted my computer and went back into the
Okay.
studio. So
Okay, so it sounds like everything's functioning.
yeah, she says it sounds like everything's going the way it should be.
I'm asking if
Is-
everything.
And you're hearing me okay, correct?
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
All right. So
Okay. You did want to transition because you wanted to hide.
yeah.
Keep that in mind.
So get back to the story here. I did transition because I wanted to hide, really. It was a self-protective method, and I didn't do it because I wanted to be a man. Never at any time was it because I wanted to be a man. I spent 30 years in transition due to life happening and various things that kept me from leaving transition. But ultimately, it's because I never really knew how to get out after the first 7 years. I was pretty much obligated to the whole thing, and it took 30 years because of life getting in the way, really. There's a certain amount of having to stay with it after being committed to all my documentation changing, and my family always accepted me as a lesbian, but when I started this whole talk about transitioning, that's when I lost popularity. And I had always been kind of a flake in my family, and I don't mean flake like a loser kind of flake, because I was very motivated, but I ended up doing, job hopping, and I ended up not job hopping, but moving to different places. But what my family wasn't aware of was that all those job hops and all those moving around things was because I was being evicted from housing, and I wasn't able to get a job. And my daughter there were people after my daughter. And what I mean by that is, back in the 70s, lesbian mothers were in a position to lose their children just because they were lesbian, because there were no laws protecting us from that. And I had 4 different occasions in my lifetime, or in my daughter's young lifetime, that someone tried to take her from me. So I ended up sending her to my parents in order to keep her out of the Child Protective Services system. And those were the reasons: the evictions from places to live, the not being able to keep a job, and people chasing me down, trying to take my daughter from me. Those were the 3 big reasons why, when I found out about transitioning as from female to male, that's when I started looking into it. And it was never about being in the wrong body. It was never about wanting to be a boy or a man. It was none of those things. It was purely out of survival that I did what I did. And things were different back then, very different back in the 70s. And I was born in 1955. So, I'm one of the products of the baby boom.
Yeah.
And so my story is different from a lot of the others, the younger generation now, because I didn't do it because I wanted to be a man. I never medicalized except for testosterone. And the long-term usage of testosterone was what caused me to have a hysterectomy, and was a major contributor to those 5 heart attacks that you mentioned. So the message I try very clearly to send is, I didn't do this because I wanted to be a man. And it took 30 years to get out of transition because I didn't know how to get out.
And you make that very clear. That's your lead sentence in your preface.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me read it. Let me read it out.
Okay.
Let me be very clear. I did not go down the rabbit hole of transition because I wanted to be a man. At no time did I see myself as residing in the, quote, wrong body, nor did I ever secretly wish I had been born a boy. My purpose was to survive life as I knew it during the mid-1970s and into the 1980s.
Correct.
And I think you also, the name of your book, Down the Rabbit Hole, you give a really cool explanation for that, I think. And it of course, it refers to Alice in Wonderland. And let me read one more little passage. Let's see. Unaware of the consequence, Alice drank a mysterious, wait, that's not what here we go. Burning with curiosity. This is from Alice in Wonderland. Burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it and was
That's
just
what-
in time. Huh? Yes, this is a quote from the book. Just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole
Yeah, that's
under the hedge.
right.
In another moment, down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. And then you also mentioned that unaware of the consequence, Alice drank a mysterious elixir that made her so large she could barely move, and ate a seemingly normal tea cake that made her so small she almost drowned in her tears. So that, I think that is just a really cool and creative way of explaining how in your desire just to be safe, you went into a rabbit hole, and then there's this mysterious elixir that's supposed to straighten everything out. Instead, it caused you to have a hysterectomy, and you had 5 heart attacks.
Mhm.
So
yeah.
really
Along,
cool.
yep, that was it. A lot of people totally agreed with that whole metaphor. Also, I got a lot of good response to that, and
Mhm.
I will say that I have. I in my acknowledgments, I mentioned the Southern Oregon Women's Writers Group, and they are a huge contributor to the success of this book because they pushed me and pushed me and pushed me and dared me to bring things up and dared me to write about stuff. And they accepted me as my lesbian self, and they didn't understand my story completely, but they allowed me the room to speak my truth. And in that, the book was more of a journal in the beginning. You know, it was just my therapist's suggestion to journal things, my experiences, my thoughts, and so on. And this same therapist was the one that encouraged me to write a book. And so I had the rough beginnings of a book when I joined this writers group, and I didn't get the negativity that I was afraid of because, and I say that because as a lesbian separatist, which is how I came out in 1976, I was really concerned that my peers and my lesbian community would be my peers would not accept me for the transition. And that is based on my own experience from in the beginning when I first came out, and the attitude that lesbians and especially the separatist feminists had towards being part of the patriarchy. And I got called a coward a lot of times when I started my transition. My friends who eventually turned their backs on me were calling me a coward and a traitor. And 30 years later, that's the vision I had in my head when I started detransitioning and trying to assimilate back into the lesbian community. And fortunately, the women that I met through this writers group encouraged me to write this story. They said it was very important to get it out there. And they never gave me any flack for what I did. They didn't quite understand why I did it, but they didn't chastise me or condemn me for it.
Okay, Jessie, one of the things I wish you would pause on a little bit and talk a little bit more about, because I'm of your generation. I'm also a baby boomer, and went through all the same things you did, and a little, other than the fact that I'm not lesbian, but I've heard of a lot of things, but I don't believe I'd ever even heard of lesbian separatism. And then you also mentioned to me that it was also the time of the so-called lavender, not the
Menace.
lavender scare, because that was the State
Yeah.
Department. The
Yeah.
lavender, what is it?
Well,
Notes are gone.
there was a kind of a loose fitting or a loose knit organization, if you will, of women who were also part of the women's rights movement. And there were several moments in time when some of the leaders of the National Organization for Women who did not want lesbians to be a part of their group because they were afraid of everybody's perceptions of them as lesbians also. So the Lavender Menace actually came from that, branched out and became this loose fitting organization because they weren't welcome into the larger group of women who were on the front lines, looking. The Equal Rights Amendment was out there at the time, and the National Organization for Women were all standing up and demanding equalities and the various parts and pieces that were involved in that. And the gay rights movement was kind of fresh. It kind of came up in the ranks along with these other two movements. And the Lavender Menace was basically that whole group. And I'm talking very loosely here. I'm not a aficionado or any of the, well-known names of this group, but this is what I know of it, in that it was a smaller group of lesbian women who said, we're women too. So what if we're lesbian? And so that's kind of how it came about.
That's
So
really-
Jessie, I'm kind of curious if you could go more into this. You said that you got a lot of pushback in your social community about transitioning, and you also said within your family too. So you had a social component that was acceptance of your sexuality, and you had your family that was acceptance of your sexuality, from what I gather. So what kind of was the main push that made you transition?
I got tired of being a target.
Yeah.
I got tired of, I'm an activist. I am not shy about standing up and speaking to oppression or whatever else words you want to use. I'm just kind of a loudmouth that way, and I've always been. And I came out of the closet as a separatist and screaming at the top of my lungs. And separatism at the time, and this is my interpretation, like I said, I'm not an aficionado or anything, but separatism at the time was that complete separation from mainstream society and the patriarchal mindset that we all know that word, patriarchy. It was a time when the lesbians were not only separating from mainstream mindset, but they were breaking out into different ways of learning how to take care of themselves. And that kind of was the start of the lesbian back to the land movement. Women moved away from big cities. They found land that they could afford and created their own intentional communities based on this separatist mindset of not being dependent on any piece or faction of the mainstream culture, the straight culture that was, very bigoted at the time. There's a lot of homophobia going on. So the separatism itself was really about breaking free from all of it. And out of that came the back to the land movement. A lot of the women's publications, women learned how to create books, and they started businesses, and they did all these various things independent of men. And that was the separatist piece.
Has anybody looked in terms of writing monographs, or, would you have any idea how many lesbian separatist groups there were, back to the land or otherwise, And has anybody looked into it? Because that's all of that is fascinating to me.
Well, it's part of our history. It's part of lesbian culture. Unfortunately, it's the pieces and parts that are being left in the dust.
Yeah.
The Back to the Land movement is something that most of the younger lesbians that I know, first off, they're afraid to use the word lesbian anymore, and second off, they just don't know about this because it's not spoken about. And
It just seems to me that would be a perfect master's thesis or PhD dissertation or something like that for people, because I mean, they're always wanting you to look into something that hasn't been looked into. And sometimes you come up with silly things like I did just to get through the system. But I do want to say we have two people here who have commented. One of them is one of my all-time favorite people, Forrest, who is a personal friend of mine, and he's been in Pacific Northwest. He has an unusual story too, and has lived in San Francisco, as I think you did too. And our mutual friend Aaron Kimberly has stopped by to. He says he's here to support you.
Yeah, Aaron and we collaborate on a lot of things. And if it's the Forest that I think is the same Forest, and I can't speak for Forest, but I believe this person was also living in transition at one point. If it's the person that I know of. No?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Forrest
it's
is
Forest.
gay. Yeah, he's gay.
Okay.
But I know, he's told me a lot about himself, and but he's never mentioned that. He's been a very good friend to me.
Then that's okay. I mean, I don't know everybody's story. I know Aaron quite well, though. And back to what you mentioned about a thesis, some kind of dissertation or a documentation of this Back to the Land movement, if you will. There actually is a dissertation by a woman named Heather Baumeister.
Okay.
And she wrote a piece called Rural Revolution. And it is her dissertation through Portland State University, I believe is where she went, speaking to this Back to the Land movement in Southern Oregon mostly. But Southern Oregon is kind of like the core of that. There are other women's lands all throughout the United States, and based basically on the same idea is women finding land, usually, land that nobody else wants, because back then women, first off, the women that came from our background, number one, some of them weren't even allowed to have a checkbook, never mind a piece of land. So the land that some of the women found was land that no one else wanted, but it was a starting point. And a lot of those women's lands that I'm familiar with are here in Southern Oregon. And a lot of the folks that were interviewed for this dissertation that Heather Baumeister put together are now friends of mine. And they're the ones that are very supportive of me doing these podcasts and writing my book and all the things that I've done.
Yeah. Well, I would think they would be. Morgan, had you ever heard about the lesbian separatist movement?
No, I have not. No.
It's not something that people talk about anymore.
Well, Jessie, I'm also kind of curious about, you spoke about some of the side effects that you experienced taking the testosterone. If you could go into that, and as well as if the dosage that you were getting, is it something that has been revised and you were getting a higher dosage than, people that are transitioning today are getting? Is there any knowledge on that? I know you are in the healthcare service, so you might have some knowledge on that.
What I know about it for for factual information is that at the time, and I am pretty certain that the people that were in my position are still currently on testosterone. It was all basically the same dosage. It just really was. Testosterone is a serious hormone.
Mhm.
It kicks into high gear almost immediately. I mean, I was losing my hair and my voice was cracking within 6 months
Wow.
of taking it. And I wasn't taking an unusually high dose. But this, and I say but I don't know that but is the right word. However, this day and time, what the younger generation are experiencing with dosing of testosterone is they have, I'm going to try to say in the early 2000s, there was this rub-on testosterone. It was like a cream that they could rub on their bodies.
Mhm.
So not everybody can stick themselves with a needle, you know. So this cream, and I don't know for an absolute fact, I think that this cream is stuff that some of the people that are calling themselves trans these days are getting through Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
When I was in the beginning of my living in transition, you'll have to excuse the noises. I'm in a hotel room. I think that's the ice machine. But anyway, when I started doing it, there was also an underground market that you could get it from.
Mm.
And this day and age, people are getting it prescribed to them. You know, and it's not, when I got mine prescribed to me, I had to go through counseling first for over a year. And this day and age, people can get their hands on it within weeks and possibly even within the week of seeing some type of medical counsel through Planned Parenthood or a gender affirming care clinic. I mean, people are getting their hands on this stuff way faster than I ever did. And the biggest reason for that is when I started my living in transition, there was a whole different set of rules involved. It was the Harry Benjamin standards of care that were in place then. And they had serious gatekeepers. There were serious restrictions to how this whole process could start or continue. And all those gates are practically non-existent at this point in time.
Well, that's what you hear. You hear I've heard so many times that these kids will go in to see a therapist, a counselor, a doctor, something, and within 15 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
they have a prescription for testosterone. That's just...
Yeah. And I think, this is my own opinion, gender affirming care is a really bad term. Gender affirming care literally means that those doctors and those therapists that these younger people have been going to can't tell them, you know, I don't know that this is a good idea. Gender affirming care requires them to say, okay, let's go there. All right, you think you're a boy or a girl? Well, here's your prescription for whatever hormone, either way, that a person needs to start what they call hormone replacement therapy. It's not replacement of any kind. So the terminology that people are using these days, in my opinion, is completely incorrect. Hormone replacement would mean that the person has no hormones, and that's just not the case. We all are born. I mean, most everything we do is hormonally based. You know, in utero, we're all one sex until that testosterone wash happens, and that's what splits us up. That's just biology, and that's a whole nother argument. But
I think you're really, it's so important for us to realize how these phrases like gender affirming care are so carefully crafted
Mhm.
to cover up and to misdirect. It's like, the bombs are called peacekeepers.
Yeah.
And, all of that.
Mhm.
All yeah, it's not gender affirming care. It's forcing kids. It's a
Well,
medical scandal
right.
and a journalistic scandal.
Gender affirming, quite literally in my book anyway, and a lot of others at this point, gender affirming care is a kid coming in and saying, I'm a boy. I think I'm a boy. I want to be a boy. And that doctor or that therapist saying, okay, sure. That same kid could go in there and say, I'm Thomas the Train, which, little kids do that. I mean, I have adult children now, and all of them, my oldest daughter wanted to be a Cabbage Patch doll at one point, and that's just not realistic. But when
It's not
she
going
was,
to happen.
it's like in kindergarten, what are you going to do? Okay, but that's just that, it's just kid growing up.
It's just kids, and as you say, you're required to affirm that this is a little boy who's actually a little girl, and you are steered away from asking about any other problems going on. I mean, just look at what I've read about your story, where you've got family issues, you're getting all these mixed signals about being Jewish and Christian, and all of these things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention your dad going off to Vietnam, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And had you been sent to a clinician when you were 12 years old, and they just said they didn't do anything to help you with the what they call comorbidities.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and had I been sent to a clinician at the age of 12, they probably, because of the time frame, would have sent me to some kind of a sanatorium where they would have done electroshock therapy on me to zap the gay out of me. Because I didn't have the term I'm gay, I think I'm a lesbian, or any of those terms at the age of 12.
Yeah.
And my objection to children, going back to one of your beginning statements, my objection to children having anything to do with medicalization of any kind is, kids, myself, we all go through puberty, and not one of us comes out of there going, you know what? I am absolutely dead set on the fact, or, I'm firm in the fact that I'm this way. Does that make sense? I mean, like I said, my daughter wanted to be a Cabbage Patch doll when she was in kindergarten. If I tell her that story now, she just goes, oh my God, are you still talking about that? There was a time when she told me all she wanted to do was marry a rich man and live in a condo. And she's not doing that at all these days. And when she went through puberty, she was raised in a lesbian household. She lived with my parents, who are heterosexual. She went to a regular high schools, regular other kids who were going through the same issues in puberty. And, we all struggle with that. Every one of us. There's not one person on this planet that doesn't go through puberty. Unfortunately, the kids are being yanked up this day and age. They're being yanked up. And when they go into these clinics and say, I don't want to wear I don't want to wear a dress, I want to wear pants, then I believe that this whole thing is very deep-seated homophobia still. And they, a long time ago, parents didn't want gay boys in their family. They did not want to have a gay son. And at some point, that gay son, they could have mentally handled better as a daughter. And that's craziness.
It is.
12-year-old boy who thinks he's gay should just be left alone instead of being convinced into the whole idea that he's a girl instead.
Well, and I think I completely agree with you that this is homophobia and I don't know if I want to say misogyny, but there's a lot going on there that doesn't have anything to do with affirming who people are. I mean, not every. I mean, if God forbid, all the gay boys and all the lesbian girls were persuaded to go down this path that leaves them infertile, permanent medical patients, all those kinds of things, you will have, in essence, erased homosexuals.
Yeah.
Or not erased, but have gone way far down that path.
Right. And homophobia has always been a thing. The issue today for me is that I don't care what an adult does. The people that I know that transitioned as an adult, they did that all by themselves. I did it at the age of 32. I made that choice. And my parents did not like it, but they couldn't tell me otherwise because I was 32 years old. My daughter was living with them at the time when I started my transition. She had issues with it that I didn't know about for 20 years because she didn't know how to talk to me in that form. She knew I was a lesbian because that's what she knew. And when I started saying I'm a man, or I want, not that I want to be a man, but you have to call me by a male name now, that was traumatizing for her. And I didn't know about it for 20 plus years because we just didn't talk about it. And she didn't know how to talk to me about it.
And that's one of the issues that people like Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad and these other clinicians who have gotten, taken this deep dive and really gotten into it, is they point out that it is hurtful. And you say this in your book, that it hurt your mom, it hurt your dad, it hurt your siblings, it hurt your children. And one of the really beautiful things you had to say is that you went through a lot of therapy to realize that it wasn't just about what was happening to you, but what was happening to them, and that they were being hurt. And therefore they've had to forgive you, or the forgiveness pieces come into your story. And that is not something we're encouraging people to do right now, is to be forgiving of people who don't see it or don't want it. I mean, who don't see any value in transitioning or don't want it for their children, and it hurts them, not to use the name they gave their beautiful baby, all of those things, that there actually is some hurt there.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a good thing to acknowledge it.
Well, and it wasn't about necessarily them forgiving me. It was about me apologizing to them.
Yeah.
Because transitioning, and I will say this every single time anybody asks, transitioning is very self-centered and a very arrogant activity. It focuses on that person and that person alone, and everything else is on the periphery. And, whatever comes up just gets in the way of that. And I experienced that. I totally did. My mother told me, and I put it in my book, pretending to be a man is not going to fix any of your problems. So she was on it from the beginning. She also knew that I was one of her kids and she loved me anyway. And, she was still supported me. But my siblings, aside from one of them, all my siblings turned their back on me because they just figured I'd lost my mind. I was okay as a lesbian, but this whole trans stuff was something they just couldn't fathom. And
Yep.
I had to learn what my responsibility was and all of that so that I could turn around and apologize. And that was a big one. Apology.
And yeah, another one of your really great sentences, and it's on page 20 if anybody has the book.
Well, Ellen, before you go into that, I just want to say I do have to head out at 9. I have a prior engagement, but I have enjoyed this conversation. I wish that I wish I could. Wish we didn't have all those issues in the beginning, so I could have stayed longer and listened to your story. Thank you so much, Jessie, for coming out and
Get the book.
really kind of being this voice for the youth and giving them a well-rounded view on their choices and what how they should move forward if they choose to do transition or if they choose to live out their life in different ways. I really applaud you for coming out and giving us time.
We can talk about it again sometime, I'm sure.
Yes, please. I look forward to it, but I do have to go. I hate that it's so soon, but I do. So bye, Jessie, and bye, Ellen.
All right.
Bye, Morgan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Drive carefully. I was about to read this sentence because I just loved it. My attempts to stay connected to your siblings were self-centered, obnoxious, defiant, and generally met with a distinct lack of interest in having anything to do with me.
Yeah.
So that is, you have a way with words, Jessie.
Thank you.
You can get it said.
Thank you. I
You can
appreciate
get it said.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I also found very interesting is that you talk about your judgment of men and male gender roles.
Yeah. That
Change.
was
And let me read this passage too, because it's you say your judgment of men and male gender roles has changed a bit over time. This only comes after years of living in transition. So that the 30 years or whatever it was in transition gave you something to think about in that respect. And
Yeah.
he said, and you said, after living in transition and engaging in conversations and interactions with men who assumed I was just another man, and it's important that you were working as a trucker then, and you said witnessing their aggression and narcissism, their repulsive and risky behaviors, their slovenly habits, and their chauvinism, all with the implied expectation of my consent, so forth and so on. And then you say, by contrast, living in transition allowed me to see men in a different way and gave me some personal knowledge of their struggles to comply with a rigid and gender-based system that demands absolute loyalty and obedience. They have been raised, molded, abused, and affected by the same culture that imposes the gender-specific rules adhered to by the women who walk with them. So I think that is, again, that's something very beautiful and very, very introspective. And, I've also, being the same age as you are and so forth, I hear and see women making the most absurd claims about men and men's the way they sit and that kind of thing. And I'm just like, grow up, Just don't be so harsh and judgmental. They're living the way they were
We're-
taught
yeah.
to live, just the way you are.
And that was a big one for me because I still don't choose to have men in my space. However, when they are in my space, and they are doing something that I turn my nose at, I can understand where it comes from a lot better now. And in the beginning, before I started living in transition, I wouldn't give them the time of day. And now I can at least give them that much and understand why they behave that way. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that about the younger generation because they're being raised sort of kind of differently because everybody is challenging those gender roles. But the way I was raised, gender roles were very much in place and imprinted on us. And I had a very low, very dim view on men and their behaviors. And it wasn't because I was abused by anybody. Not to say my dad was not abusive, because he was. However, he didn't take it out on me because I wouldn't let him. And I found myself protecting my younger sisters from it. But I can walk down the street now and see a man being foolish or being typical of what I expect a man to do and know that he does it a lot. He's doing it because he was taught that.
Right.
None of us get away from that.
Right. And our fathers and mothers, our aunts and uncles have their own histories too.
Mhm.
And it took me a long time to figure out that my father was doing the best he could and was giving us all the things he didn't have, including being sober and reliable, all the things that really, I was just like, why can't we just have, more fun, and he was giving us the things he didn't have. And he was very, very successful at that.
And your dad was probably raised with the idea and the mindset that big boys don't cry. And a man who showed any kind of emotion was weak and didn't have a backbone, that kind of stuff. I never really saw my dad in a calm place or even in a passive role until he got sick. But before then, it was all about toeing the line. And when I say jump, don't ask me how high. I just want you to jump. And he was definitely, of course, the military probably drilled that into him, but he was still raised as a man, and he was still raised with that gender role stereotype thing going on. And like I said in my book, I don't believe that it will be able to get away from gender identity because it is what it is. You're a man or you're a woman, and there's expectations that go with those. And there's expectations, maybe not so much of kids anymore, but my parents were raised to believe and to instruct us to do the same. And there were certain things my mother did, and there were certain things my dad did. And kids that are non-conforming to that, like myself, had a different name for it. And they have an even more different name for it now. And it gets it kind of gets ahead of everybody, because I do disagree with a lot of the stuff that the rhetoric that's going on now. I don't agree with a whole bunch of it. But it's, as long as it's an adult doing what they're doing, I don't have any say unless it's in direct conflict with something I'm doing also. I just don't believe that children need to be anywhere near this stuff. There are kids, like, for example, myself, who didn't want to wear a dress, and I had to wait until I was old enough. That was 14. I had to wait and then I could start getting a job, and those were babysitting jobs, and the money that I earned, I could go out and buy myself a pair of blue jeans. But up until that point, my parents said I wore a dress, and that's just the way it was. So it's kids aren't being raised that way anymore. I think they're being raised with a whole lot less restriction and a whole lot less expectation, you know.
And they're being unmoored.
Mhm.
You know, they don't want to make the decisions about whether they go to school or stay home. They don't want that. They want to be hedged in a little bit with
Right.
a little freedom, a little freedom, a little freedom.
Yep.
But
when I was a school bus driver, one of the things that we all agreed upon was that there was three personalities in one child: the one you saw at home, the one you saw at school, and the one you saw on the school bus. And the one thing in all of that is that kids need to know who the boss is. They need to know the rules. No matter if they stand there and say, I don't want to hear it, they still deep inside want to know the parameters. And I think that adults are the same way. We all need to know who the boss is when we're at work. We all need to know who calls the shots. We may not agree with who is in that position, but silently, we still all want to know who's calling the shots and making up the guidelines.
right. And one of the things that's you were on Stephanie Wynn's show.
I did interview with her once. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's people who have been on her show, or maybe not, I don't know, talking about the fact that, you know, when I was growing up and you were growing up, we didn't know anything about our teachers.
No.
Or their, you know,
No.
we didn't know. They were the teacher. That was it.
Yep.
And now the teacher, you know, is getting down on the floor and sharing, you know, about her divorce or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So adults are being unmoored too. That's just not something you need to be doing.
No.
You need to know, you know, you hate to say it, but stay in your place, stay in your lane.
Right.
Be the adult, let the child be the child.
And you and I both know that there was a time when we had no idea what our teachers were up to over the weekend. And then there was a time when I was a young up and coming lesbian that I didn't know about, when I always wondered, and I didn't have a word for it. I always wondered, okay, so you're going out to dinner with your husband, but I know of this other person over here that doesn't have a husband, and why can't they talk about what they're doing? And when I was in the 70s, that was part of questioning things, was how come I can't talk about my girlfriend, but this other guy can talk about his girlfriend at work?
Right.
So all of these things have matured or have, you know, gone on to different levels of awareness. I personally don't think that kids need to know that much about their parent or their teachers. And some of those books that people are introducing to children in schools these days, as a gay parent, I would have totally have an issue with them.
Oh my gosh.
Even as a gay parent who should be, you know, like free and easy and be all alternative and everything.
Well, I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune of coming across a book called This Book is Gay.
I've heard of it.
It's shocking to me. This was at the center of a conflict in Dearborn. Where's Dearborn? Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
There were some Christian parents and some Islamic parents who were just saying this book does not need to be in a middle school library. I mean, it's very graphic. It's crude, and it even says, you know, if you're feeling like you don't have people around you who are interested, you know, boys interested in boys like you are, a good place to go is Grinder. Really?
Yeah.
And I have said this to people, and they're like, well, you don't know what it's like to be gay. And I'm like, I know what it's like. I know pornography when I see it. And I know that we're either going to make space for Christian parents and Islamic parents and other and gay parents, or we're just going to, and somebody said, well, you're just very, you're arrogant. Just because you've had kids doesn't mean that you know all about parenting. And I'm like, I don't want this book. And I'm totally with those Islamic and gay and fundamentalist Christian parents who are like, of all the books you could have in a middle school library, this one has to be there.
There was a time in the 90s, and I addressed this piece in my book in one of the chapters, the 80s and the 90s, I think it is, where there were organizations, if you will, religious groups, the moral majority in specific. That was just one. Then in Oregon, there was the Oregon Citizens Alliance, and they had petitions and ballot measures that people voted on to keep information about being homosexual out of the schools. I mean, that was quite literally some of the ballot measures, was keeping this stuff out of schools. And back in the 80s, I think, in California, there was what is called the Briggs Initiative. And what that did was allow the school districts, and I'm pretty sure it was just in California, to be able to fire teachers that they found out were gay.
Yeah.
And openly fire them. You're gay. You can't work here. So it's a far cry from what it is today, where books like that one that you just mentioned, which I have not seen, but I have heard of, and various others.
I was like, I'm going to get this. I'm not going to buy it, but I just went to my library and checked it out because I wanted to see, you know, for myself.
Right. I don't, even with just saying what I did about all the petitions and the ballot measures and the moral majority and all those other holier than thou people that jumped in onto the conversation and didn't want to talk about anybody that's homosexual. Even having said all of that, school's not the place for that stuff. It just isn't. I don't want anybody teaching my children about being gay. That's not their place. And that sounds really weird coming from a gay parent. All my kids are adults, but they were little at one point, and not one of them had to, or did they know about their teacher's private life. And I just think that that's the way it should be today. And I would be chastised and probably raked over the coals for saying that. But that's
one of the stories you tell in your book is that you had a partner for 5 years or something, and she became a born-again Christian.
Oh, yeah, that was my first partner.
Decided that she was living in sin with you, not because y'all were lesbians.
Oh, that's why.
Well, I mean, yes, not because you were not married, but because you were lesbians. And so she went on. And is she the person who ended up living in the cabin that you built with your own hands?
Yeah.
And never got to live in?
Yeah. And she's living, as far as I know, and this isn't official as far as I know, because I've looked the public record up to see if that cabin is still existent, and it does exist. And there is, public records about who owns it. And those two same, my ex and that woman that she moved in with, still live in the cabin. Yes.
That's crazy.
And
That
they
is
call themselves just friends.
Oh,
But
yeah.
way back when, that was code for something different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 plus 2 almost always adds up to 4.
Yeah, right. Exactly. In most people's cases and minds, yes. It just seems ironic, of course. Yes.
I'm sorry. I'm looking for, yes, this. Like and subscribe. Neither Morgan nor I is very good about keeping our mind on the business aspect of all this. We need likes and we need subscribers and all of those things. We'd rather just sit here and talk.
Well, I appreciate you talking about my book, because that's, it's getting it out into the open, out into the
Yeah.
area.
I haven't gotten all the way through it because I didn't know about it until last week, and I had to order it, and then it came like 2 days ago.
Right,
So,
right.
on top of trying to get, everything nailed down for this.
So how far along are you?
Let's see. I read about Lauren and You Make Me Uncomfortable. I read that. So I guess I'm maybe halfway through.
You haven't read the chapter about the woman I was with who I transitioned with. Her name, that would be Cherry.
I think you told me about her.
Yeah. She and I are together a long time, and I actually started my transition with her. And
Okay. That's coming up next.
yeah, I feel very sad about that whole chapter in my life. And I, at the time, was very convinced that I was doing this transition thing for both of us, because she wanted to have a kid. And I already knew what that was like for lesbian people who had kids. And I say it that way because lesbian moms is kind of stumbles on my tongue. But anyway, she wanted to have a child. And I knew what that was like when I was raising up my older daughter. And I thought that it would make us safer if we were presenting as a heterosexual couple. It would keep us out of trouble.
Right.
People wouldn't argue the fact that we had a child with us, because that was a big deal back then. Straight people didn't like to see gay people kids. That was just like this huge taboo.
Yeah.
It was one of the other motivations for staying in transition through the years with her. Unfortunately, she and I separated because she just couldn't do the transition thing anymore. She just couldn't. And I know I have since heard another person mention another lesbian couple who were together for a very long time, and one of the partners started living in transition and the other partner separated from her. And it's kind of that's what happens, because when two women get together who are lesbian into a relationship, they're not there to be looking straight. They're not there to have one of the partners look like a man. And I get that. I get it. I didn't know it at the time because, I just started living in transition. It was all brand new. But today I feel bad for that couple because I know what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very sad thing that it separates people, but I understand it. That's, that's my third relationship, who I also speak to in that book. It was only a novelty for her for 6 years, and then she didn't want to do it anymore. And that's putting it very short.
Yeah.
The chapter is much longer than that.
Yeah, I will. I mean, I will read it, and I've heard you talk about these things. It's I, I don't know who it was, but you said something else that I thought was very poignant. Later on, I guess maybe after you had detransitioned, or later, that you had a partner who said, when I see you, I see a lesbian. And that was very meaningful to you.
Mhm.
I can see why that would be the case, because another quote that you have in your book is that it's one thing for people to love you, maybe. It's something else for people to understand you.
Yeah, that was my very first quote from Ellen DeGeneres. Yeah, in the chapter
Yeah.
1. To be loved is wonderful, but to be understood is profound.
Yeah.
And the woman that you are referring to is my current partner. Yes.
I was afraid to say it because I thought, well, I'll get it wrong and I'll bring in some some previous partner, but
No.
Debbie must be something else. Yeah.
She is, and she is one of the catalysts, one of the biggest catalysts for me to decide it was time to officially detransition. Because when we got together, she knew that I was still living as Mr. Jessi is who I call that person. And she was willing to go along for a little while, but then she sat me down and said, I just don't see you that way. I don't think I'll ever see you that way. And instead, it kind of was a reflection on a past relationship. But at the time, it was actually that door that opened it up for me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted out so bad, and I
Yeah.
had been wanting out for so long that
Yeah.
it was very encouraging, and it was absolutely just a salve to hear somebody say, I don't see you that way, and know that it's okay. I knew then it was okay to start really actively looking into detransitioning, because there was somebody there that saw me for who I was and still am. She saw behind that facade.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that really resonates with me. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I grew up in the family of civil rights activists.
You did?
In Albany, Georgia, which is the first place Martin Luther King was put in jail, and later on Birmingham. I was in the 7th grade when my classroom when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And all the kids erupted into cheers and foot stomping, and the N-word lover is dead. And of course, I was one of those N-word lovers.
Uh-huh.
And, I try to tell people what racism was like. Most people are not really interested. And try to explain what that was like for me. And very few people are even capable of understanding, because they didn't go through it.
Right.
But so I'm just affirming how important it is for people to feel like other people understand them.
Right. And I did mention that in my book. I think it was in Growing Up, the chapter Growing Up. I mentioned the fact that my father and I were sitting on the couch when that happened, when JFK was shot. And I didn't know the significance then, because I was 8 or whatever age I was at the time. I think, about 8.
Yeah, I was 12.
Yeah. So I don't know that 8-year-olds these days they're not hearing racism in this manner that we did. Back then it was obvious, and I think it's still obvious, but back then also, it wasn't a talking point. It wasn't a topic of conversation. Nobody talked about this stuff. I know my parents didn't, but I knew
it was the topic of every day's discussion in my family. And it's because in Albany, Albany was one of the first places the Freedom Riders went to because of the viciousness of its segregation, its language, and all of those things.
And we're down to the language part here in this day and time as well. The language is volatile and it's damaging. And back then, those moments in time was what started my brain thinking about civil injustice, the inequalities that were happening. There was quite a few other things going on too later on in life, like Kent State and the Vietnam War. And it's kind of like trying to explain the lesbian separatism or back to the land movement to somebody who has never heard those words before, you know? Then you take that language away, and then you have people going, well, aren't you, I don't know, what's a woman? I mean, who, nobody asked me that question when I was little. Nobody. And when you were asked, what's a woman? There was an answer, and everybody went, yep, that's it. I don't get it these days. So it's kind of hard being old in those little things. It's like, what do you mean you don't know what a woman is? That's just crazy.
That's silly.
Yeah. I mean, really. And no, it's not just what anybody says they can be, because it just doesn't work that way. A trans woman is a biological male. That's the only way a trans woman can exist, is to be biologically male first. And a trans man the same way. You know, I called myself trans man for many years, but I knew for a fact I wasn't. I was female. And I maintained my lesbian my lesbianism throughout that whole thing, and I really got in trouble for it, actually.
Well,
So it's just the times they are a changing. That's what Bob Dylan said in his song.
You know, and it's this whole basic liberal principle of free speech. Vietnam was another one of those things, and this is a story. My husband grew up on the mission field, and in Asia. He came back to go to Samford University, which is where I went. It was a Baptist school, and one of the preaching students asked him if he would come to an anti-war gathering at Samford, and asked Al if he would lead in a prayer. And so, as Al tells it, they drew a grand crowd of about 3 people. And he led a prayer, and he thought, you know, what could go wrong? A Christian campus, prayer, anti-war. The next day, the dean of students or somebody called him in and told him that they felt like he would probably be happier somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, they threw themselves on their mercy, and they let him stay. But as he tells it, he said, I swear I will never pray again if you just let me stay. I mean, it's crazy. And when people tell me I need to say this, say that, affirm that, it just gets all over me.
Right.
Don't tell me what words I can say. Don't tell me what I cannot say.
That's what another person by the name of Jordan Peterson would call compelled speech.
Yeah, well, you know, he had to take early retirement because he wouldn't use the preferred pronouns, which were all over the map. A, B could change on a dime, and he took early retirement.
Yeah, I mean, no. America was built on the idea of freedom of speech. And one of the consequences of freedom of speech is someone's going to get their feelings hurt. But that doesn't mean that that person saying that stuff isn't allowed to say it. Another piece is your freedom to do what you want ends at my nose. You know, we get to say what we get to say. It's just part of being an American. And for people to take that away is not cool at all. And I kind of blend that in with the whole business of, I went to Gemini and did this actually. I typed in, why is it that people are afraid of this whole trans ideology conversation? And part of it is that people don't want to rock the boat. And what I remember through all of my growing up is that's how things changed, is when someone rocked that boat.
Well, and now that people can do these things to children.
It's the great experiment, just like electroshock therapy was for gay people.
Right. And I've talked about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment.
Yes.
I'm an Alabamian, and that happened in Alabama. The longest running non-therapeutic medical experiment on human beings in history. Some people say, I don't know how we know.
Well, I don't know
all of that, but
yeah, and they did it to him without even telling them. They did it to him without even telling.
Pardon me?
They did that experiment on those folks without even telling them.
Well, yeah, the men on whom they did the experiment were, and it was just to watch them, watch what happens when somebody has syphilis. And these were very poor, rural, Black men. And this was an experiment being carried out by the federal government for no reason whatsoever. And what they got in exchange was a crummy wooden box to be buried in, you know.
Exactly. I get it.
It's and so people say, well, this is just shocking. Lobotomies, just shocking. Electroshock therapy, shocking. But this is not shocking.
Yeah, it should be. Absolutely. Because in all of those cases, except for maybe the syphilis experiment, nobody caused any bodily harm. Being gay, there was nothing to lose aside from your anonymity. You didn't lose body parts.
Right. And I agree, but just to say that the experiment continued even after antibiotics were developed that could have cured them.
Sure.
So that it did affect their bodies.
Oh, that's what I'm saying is, aside from the syphilis experiment, nobody had to lose any body parts over it. I mean, I electroshock therapy now, take it down a notch and say that it permanently altered somebody's brain. But with this whole transitioning of kids and medicalizing them, you're taking off body parts and you're injecting a hormone into a kid that is never going to be able to do X, whatever X is later on down the road. And it's been, a lot of people have called this the great experiment of the decade or the whatever 21st century, because it is an experiment. They don't have the knowledge. Nobody knew when I started taking testosterone that it was going to affect me 30 years down the road and cause 5 different heart attacks. They also didn't know at the time until after it started happening, and people had to absolutely show them the proof that it was going to atrophy a woman's reproductive organs to the point where they had to be removed. Nobody knew that stuff. And I think people are actually mentioning it to people that are transitioning or taking these hormones. But from what I understand, it's a very brief conversation. And it was, you might get, this might happen to you.
Yeah. Two things pop into my mind. One, I was thinking about your story about when you went to the hospital, and so one of the things people have talked about is, what difference does it make if you get into a wreck or you go to the hospital and it's not clear what your sex is? And of course you had what was kind of a like black comedy situation. You want to tell that story?
Well, yes, it was it was called a hook story is what it was in the beginning of the book. And it was a recollection of a time when I had gone into the emergency room at a hospital and told them that I thought I was having a UTI, because I had already experienced going to other doctors in the past and saying, well, I'm actually a woman, and I think it has something to do with my reproductive organs, and being turned into a zoo exhibit at that point. But in this particular story, I knew that, and I said, I think I have a UTI, which is a urinary tract infection, and they had me pee in a cup, which is standard procedure, and they do a urinalysis on that. And certain things in that urinalysis could tell the doctor yes or no. And the doctor came in and said, Mr. Harris, your test was inconclusive. So now I have to check your prostate. And two things were happening then. One of them being that the word transgender was being used by me, and it was freaking people out. Mm. And I believe that the doctor thought I was going from male to female. And when he said very uncomfortably and not looking me in the eye at all, saying, I need to check your prostate, I think he thought I was biologically male. Mm-hmm. And transgendering at that point in time. They weren't, the conversation was very crude. And he wanted to check my prostate. And I said, well, you just go right ahead. And if you find one, let me know.
Yeah.
Because his assumption of me was completely off base.
Yeah. Well, didn't you say he then turned on his heel and walked out?
Yeah, he took his gloves off and said, well, there's nothing I can do for you then, because he was at a loss.
Yeah.
And that loss was, first off, being trans was not as popular as it is today. People weren't talking about it as much. Now if you go into any modern hospital facility and you tell a person I'm trans, it doesn't even, it's like, okay. Back then it was like, oh my God, what? Oh my God, and I truly believe that he thought I was a man transitioning to female, mm-hmm. as opposed to I'm a trans-identified female who presents as a man.
Right.
He had it backwards.
Yeah. And so that it matters in terms of mm-hmm. getting good treatment and to at least have the sex right.
There's other places where it matters too. There's a particular test, and I can say this with quite a bit of accuracy because I worked in the lab for the last 10 years of my medical career. And we dealt with trans patients way before it was called gender affirming care. We just had a trans health team. And one of the things that was a fact was a trans woman presenting and coming in for a blood draw for a prostate. It's called a PSA test, and it's looking for an antigen for cancer, for prostate cancer. Those numbers are affected by the introduction of estrogen. It alters those numbers. So the doctor on the other end, not knowing any different, would see the numbers differently, and those numbers were skewed, as opposed to a biological male who was not presenting as trans, who just needed a screening, coming in, and those numbers would be accurate. But because of the estrogen, those numbers are altered. There's also, when I had those heart attacks, there were different signs. Each time I had a different signal. And there's the common thought that there are certain signs of a heart attack for men, and then there's some for women that are different, which generally is the case. I presented all of those. And at that point in time, I was afraid of the fact that they were going to have to do some kind of procedure to me, and I presented as male, and then they discovered I was a female. That was my biggest fear at that point in time.
Yeah.
You bring that up to modern day. I stopped driving truck because I was afraid of being involved in a vehicle accident on the road and being refused medical assistance because them taking off any of my clothing and them thinking I was a man and finding out otherwise would have stopped them from treating me.
Yeah.
And most of that fear was when I was driving down in the southeast of the United States, where people are still very, very, very conservative. And then you bring that up to the next modern stage in our conversation. For example, in Kansas, where they have decided that everybody has to revert back to their biological sex marker on their driver's license, and people are all upset because, oh my God, now I can't drive. Yes, I can understand the stress that invokes in people, because when you're presenting yourself as the other gender, that marker is important. I know this personally. And that person who is presenting as a female and it says male, it may freak somebody out, but it's also going to determine how they take care of a person in the emergency room.
Yeah.
Those things matter. It really does matter. And people, and I can't fault them, because not everybody is in the mind of, what happens medically. I just happen to know these things because I was in the medical field for my entire career and was in I wore a lot of hats. So I know a lot of things. I'm not a doctor, never was, but I was constantly, my entire career, I was in direct care with patients. So I learned these things along the way. And a lot of people they just don't know. One
of the other things I wanted to bring up, and we are coming up on 2 hours, and I won't keep you forever, but I think 6 days ago, the results, one of the things, and I heard this just yesterday from somebody, that if you don't affirm a child's desire to transition, that they are there's a high probability that they will commit suicide.
I don't believe that for a minute.
Well, the Finland.
The Finland studies.
Was it Finland? They just released the results of a study about 5 or 6 days ago, and they looked at a large population of people over a long period of time, and they concluded just the opposite.
Absolutely.
And it's like, what do you, but the conclusion was the morbidity rates, or the death rates, among people who transition is higher than the normal.
I would say, I'm not a gigantic, well-known name in the field, but I lived it for 30 years. I don't for 1 minute think that there's any kids out there. There might be one or two, just because nobody's perfect. There might be one or two that may feel that suicidality. I mean, they might.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you from my perspective, in my personal experience, I didn't feel suicidal until I couldn't get out.
Yeah.
That's when it happened with me. Is the first time was 7 years into it, and I wrote about it in my book.
Mm-hmm.
There was several other instances, like when I went in for my very first heart attack. At that point in time, it's like, all right, take me out. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, when you're trapped, you can't find a way out. Yeah, I think I mentioned to you the other day, it reminded me of the phrase coming in from the cold. You're out in the cold, as in you think of spies and spy novels where you're living this this life that basically is, the whole thing is a charade, and you get to the point where you can't take it anymore.
Right. And I've found myself in that position on several occasions, just because I couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And I believe that the number, to back up a minute, the numbers that people throw out there, the 0.01%, those are the people that are really, truly transsexual.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And the numbers, believe it or not, and I'm sure you know this already, the numbers of detransitioners are scaring the absolute you-know-what out of the activists, because we tell a different story, the story they don't want to hear, that because it goes against the narrative and it's against the total agenda of what the modern activists are trying to push. And they're not necessarily modern, because when I was halfway through this, I was totally immersed in the trans community in Seattle, and I was getting blowback then when I was talking about how I regretted what I did. So, the whole agenda, it's been around for a long time. It's just gotten a lot more vocal because people are being intimidated and they're afraid to stand up against the modern dialogue about it. Yeah. I'm just not.
Right. Well, I mean, you and I are we are older, and we've been through stuff and all of that. I was talking to a young woman who's going to be on the show next week, who is desisting. Yeah. And she makes a distinction between detransitioning and desisting, because she never did any medical. She's only 19. I was just like, oh my gosh. She said the Trevor Project and the Trevor Space is promoted as being a safe place and so forth. And she said she called when she's only 19 now, so she was probably, I guess, still in high school. And they just practically hung up on her because she was asking for real help, and not for gender affirming help, but for real help. And Johnny Skinner tells the same story, that he called, he was feeling like he wanted to, we're not even supposed to say the word on YouTube, but self-delete, and called the Trevor people, and just about the same thing. They hung up on him or were dismissive or so I mean all of these things. You were talking about crafting the term gender affirming care when it's exactly the opposite. And then you have these organizations that are making bank
Mm-hmm.
and deliberately or are causing more harm than good. They go against their stated objective, which is to help gay kids.
Yeah. But that, to just back up a bit,
Sure.
Trevor Project, GLAD, and even the ACLU
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
were all pro-gay organizations pushing and helping out for gay rights. Okay, and then same sex came along, and several people, not just myself, have said and believe that they just needed another project. They ran out of things to talk about because all of a sudden everybody can be gay. It's no big deal. And
No big deal.
married. So they ran out of juice. They needed another thing.
They
so-
ran out of, there was no reason for people to send them money.
Yeah, there was
Once-
no reason for them to
once-
exist anymore.
The Hodges, you know, there was, yeah. So, well, we gotta scramble here. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
And I saw the Southern Poverty Law Center had an ad about that. That's all they do anymore
Right.
is stoke this fear of these supposed hate groups, some of whom have 2 members out in, you know, rural, whatever.
Mhm.
And meanwhile, they've got billions of dollars in offshore accounts that they're not using to defend poor people. It's crazy.
Well,
We used to contribute money to the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU. And then finally I'm like, no more. No
Yeah.
more.
because they ran out of steam with their original purpose. And I'm not the only one saying this, so I feel confident saying that they ran out of steam with their original intent. And so they needed it's kind of like me. I needed another activism. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Is speaking out. And I'm not even saying being trans is bad, because I don't mean that, nor do I believe that.
Right.
It actually works for a 0.01% of people. It's for real for them. The rest of this is a social expression that every single generation has had. When it was my time when I was a teenager, everybody that I knew was wanting bell-bottom blue jeans with patches on them and John Lennon glasses. That was the thing. The Beatles were big, and following the Beatles was like the thing to do. And then the generation after that was goth.
Yeah.
You know, every generation has some way, and it's just part of the deal. We all have some way to revolt and declare our independence from, our parental generation.
Yeah.
So this is just unfortunately, and so out of hand. I cannot believe
It is
how big it has gotten.
It's crazy. It's crazy how many people I know whose children have talked about transitioning. They've either done it socially, which is, I think those kids are just plain vanilla lesbians and gays, or they have
Be straight too.
or no social skills and don't know how to connect with people. I've had 2 people very close to me tell me they wanted me out of their lives because I was a transphobe.
Yeah, well, call me whatever you want to call me. I've been called worse.
Well, yeah, I have to, but it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
And, you know, those are the kind of friends that you don't really
That's
want.
like a cult. Well, one of them, both of them were actually very young family or like family members. And one of them actually started the transitioning process with a radical mastectomy. And I mean, the underlying problems are legion. And but she didn't like me calling it into question.
Of course not.
You know, and I get it. I do. I understand. I don't like it. I think it's sad. But
And there was a lot of kids that were kicked out of their house because they told their parents they were gay.
yeah, and that happens too. So I mean, but that didn't happen in either of these two cases. They just got captured.
Sure, absolutely. Because they everybody needs a tribe. Everybody wants to belong.
And everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to do the right thing. Everybody wants to be on the right side of history. And it's but it's been 2 hours.
minus a few minutes in the beginning.
We persisted through our technical difficulties.
Yeah.
And this has been a wonderful conversation. And my best to Debbie.
Yeah, and thanks for hawking my book for me. That's great.
Yes, I do. I highly recommend it. This is it again.
Yeah,
And
thank
we'll come to you in just a couple of days. So maybe you'll come back.
Oh yeah,
We'll get caught up on what happens next and
absolutely.
all of those good things.
You betcha. And if you get a chance, get back on Amazon and write a review, would you?
Oh, I will. I meant to ask about that. Yes, I will. I will definitely do that.
Yeah, because you know
5 stars.
it's that whole thing about click and subscribe and so on and so forth. It feeds the algorithm.
Yes.
And, you know, when I look at a new book, I always want to read what everybody else thinks about it before I buy it. So that's all.
Yeah.
But it's been well received, and I'm really happy about that.
It would have to be. It was. I mean, I'm not saying this to be nice, but it is a much needed book and so elegantly written.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. I love the book. I will definitely I am definitely encouraging people to buy it and read it and reflect on it, particularly if you are in the camp where you think people are doing right by kids who say they're trans, by encouraging all of this. There are a lot of other things to look into, you know, the money, the everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you so much. I'm really glad we got to do this. And
I'm happy too. It's not everybody. It's not every day that a Southern Baptist minister asks me to talk to them online.
Well, the Southern Baptist kicked us out, but when I did that first same-sex marriage, I was part of a church that was aligned with the Southern Baptist Convention, but also the Cooperative Baptist.
Yeah, but you were a rabble rouser in your own right that way.
I was, but see, I wander into these things. I think nobody's going to think anything but, oh, she officiated it. You know, bless her heart.
Yeah, right. Well, you're a rabble rouser in your own right. Absolutely.
Well, we both are, and
absolutely.
So that's a good thing.
I want
All right,
to be on this side of history.
Pardon me?
I said I want to be on this side of history.
Yeah. Well, all righty. Well, you take good care of yourself. Best of luck with the book, and I will give you a glowing review on Amazon, and I hope we can talk again. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, to Debbie, and thank her for hanging in there with the technical issues. And And bye to everyone. And thanks for coming. And
See you again sometime.
see you next week.
All
All
right.
right. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.